So I think that, it starts with education at a very young age, right? So I think that, ensuring that the education system is involving basic skills that you need around English, but also starting to incorporate, more technology into their educational system, right? I think that's a huge one. And I think it's, kind of what I talked about, normalizing success or normalizing an opportunity that I experienced when I saw other founders building their company that made me want to do it. I think
Okay, welcome to the Remote Advantage, the podcast where we explore the future of work and payments in Latin America. I'm joined with Joseph. Hi, Joseph. How are you?
Hey, Roberto, how you doing? Good to see you.
I'm great. Joseph is founder of Lupa Hire. Lupa was born with a mission to connect top talent in Latin America with companies in the United States. And in this episode, Joseph will share the story of how Lupa Hire started, the need he saw in the market, and his vision for the future of remote work ecosystem, especially in Latin America. Okay? So first question, Joseph, is what was the spark or the aha moment that led you to create Lupa Hire?
Yeah, so I would say there wasn't really any aha moment. It was sort of something that snuck up on me and I realized that I had a
Uh-huh.
business. So myself,
Okay.
I was, whenever I started Lupa, I was working at Rappi. Rappi is, $6 billion unicorn, biggest tech company to ever come out of Colombia. And when I was working there, I noticed that, as product manager, it was pretty simple for me to figure out what was our roadmap, what were the things that we needed to build. But the how to build
Yeah.
it was quite difficult, right? Rappi's a very complex project. For those who don't know, it's like Instacart meets DoorDash of Latin America. We had billions of products, millions of stores, 9 different countries, 3 different languages. And I needed to hire a team, right? So I worked with other headhunters and worked with my HR team when I was there, but I was never really satisfied with the quality of the candidates, with the speed at which the candidates were coming in. And also, I could never really find someone that could help me figure out the difference between the 9 different countries that I had to hire, what it meant in terms of talent pool, regulation, laws, culture, everything. And I needed to hire from many different countries. So I had lots of different resources that were helping me. And at a certain point, I just realized that hey, this is the biggest, hairiest problem, right? And I like to be like a guided missile for pain in an organization. And so I remember that when I worked at Facebook, our initial onboarding was done by the CPO at the time, and he told a story of how he took over hiring at one time. And so I started doing some research, and I, just went to our founder and said, look, I'm going to take this over because it is our biggest problem, right? So at Rappi, I took over hiring. I put product mindset into it, also operational mindset, and then also started just consuming anything I could in terms of hiring books, things about talent acquisition, and started working at it. We were pretty successful. We hired hundreds, if not maybe just shy of 1,000 developers in that time. And then I started to move into other segments in the company in terms of helping them hire, whether it was call centers, marketing, finance, whatever it was. I was kind of the one that was taking on these bigger roles and leading the initiative. I wasn't doing the actual recruiting, but I was the one that was kind of coordinating and setting the strategy. And what happened is because Rappi was so successful, lots of companies came, venture capital companies came, and these funds, they came and they were talking to other people that were inside of Rappi that were looking to found companies, and they were funding them. And lots of them remembered me as the person that had helped them with their hiring
Yeah.
at one point or another. And they started to reach out to me and say, hey, Joe, can you help me with my founding engineers? Can you help me with my first CTO, my first CMO, different hiring problems? At first, I just did it because they were my friends, right? And I didn't even charge them anything. I was just like, my friend needs help. Of course, I'm going to help them start their business. I want them to be successful. That's, the mindset that I've always had. And then at a certain point, they started introducing me to their friends, right? And that was whenever people started to ask me what my rate was. And I didn't even know what a proper rate was. I didn't know anything. So I was like, let me get back to you. Went and, drew up a contract, and business just kind of started without me knowing it, right? At a certain point, I started to get a decent flow of clients coming in out of just referrals, and actually made my first hire to support me on this because it was becoming too much. I had too many roles to handle. And for that person, Felipe, you guys were in touch with him. He's still with me
Mm-hmm.
to this day, 4 years later. And yeah, from there, at a certain point, I was like, I'm having more fun building my own
But you
company.
were a company at that moment, or you're just
I was a
creating the business
freelancer, right?
model from?
Yeah, I was a
Oh, okay.
freelancer. At a certain point, I was making more money and enjoying this work more. And I, went to the Rappi founders and said, look, I'm leaving. We put together a 6-month plan for me to, have a proper succession. And during that
Yeah.
time, they also supported me to fundraise as well. So they coached me on that. They also invested some money and, committed to being my first client. So they were super helpful to me. Can't say enough about Rappi. I loved Rappi. I cried the last day I was there because I loved it so much. And maybe because I was scared to start my own business. But anyway,
Makes
we went
sense.
and raised funds, raised just under $1 million and got started. So it was one of those things that it sort of snuck up on me. And when I realized that this was something that I was really good at and something that I really enjoyed, I thought, if not now, then when? And I think like the other people that were part of the Rappi Mafia, as they called them at that time, but now we call ourselves the Rappi Mahia. We don't want to be a mafia.
Yeah.
They inspired me a lot too. And just like seeing their success normalized the success for me. I think a lot of times in life, it's whenever you see someone do something that you realize that you
Hmm.
can do it. And I think, the other people that came before me really inspired me and gave me the confidence that I could do it. And here I am 4 years later with a business that's still growing and learning a lot and still having fun.
That's beautiful. That's a great story. So you were mentioning like the beginning from the first steps from the idea to the company. But now that you have a full company, full funded, what gaps did you notice, like in traditional recruiting or staffing models that were having pain points in that process that you all guys are fixing or improving in Lupa Hire?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing is that a lot of times people look at headhunters or staffing businesses in a
Yeah.
negative light, similar to, used car salesman, right? Almost. And I think that, what I try and do differently is for me, it's not about making the placement, right? I think like the placement is whenever someone gets hired and contracted that we presented, right? And for me, it's about like, okay, how can I make a placement that's so successful that this company that maybe hadn't hired anyone in Latin America before or hadn't hired through us before, they look at that person and say, wow, they're so good that we need to work with them again, or we need to hire more people in Latin America again. And how do we do that? I think we put a lot of time into consulting our clients on, what kind of role are they actually hiring for? A lot of my clients, they come in, they have a business problem. And what I try and do is craft a solution in terms of like, this is the type of person that you need to bring. And then also we try and be really particular about their process, right? So I care a lot about what the interview process looks like because I don't just want to make one placement. I want to make a placement that's very successful. So I guide them a lot on how they should do their interview process, what kind of questions they should ask, what their scorecard should look like when they're evaluating these candidates. Because for me, it's all about match quality, match quality, match quality. And then we even support the companies on the other side in terms of onboarding. A lot of US companies, they have a little bit of a culture shock when they hire Latinos because there is a different work style. While the Latino is very similar to a US person, much more similar than a Latino person, much more similar to a US person or US work style than maybe India or China, but it's still different, right? And there's still nuances. So we try to make sure that we support them throughout the onboarding process, make sure that they have a good onboarding process set up. So for me, it's more about how do we solve a business problem successfully for this person than actually making a placement. And I think that continuity in the relationship has allowed us to grow a lot more. And, most of my business comes from referrals and word of mouth. And I think it's partly just because we take a little bit more effort into the service. And sure, it's a lot more time up front, but, a typical headhunter will fill maybe 25% of their contingency based roles. So contingency means you only pay me if you hire someone. And we're
Yeah.
usually around 60, 70% uh,
Well,
on ours.
it's a huge difference.
And I think it's just all in making sure that we're taking the time. And then the other side, I'm very selective about which clients I work with. I won't work with just anyone. If I feel like they're not going to be a good company to work for, maybe they're not, something that's attractive to the candidates that we have in our network, then I'm going to kind of walk away from them as well.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What challenge do you think the US companies are facing when hiring top talent in Latin America right now?
Well, I think the main challenge is different depending on which stage they're in, right? So if a company is there for the first time, I think there's a lot of issues that they have to cover that are fairly simple problems to solve when you know how to solve them. But if it's something that you're doing for the first time, you can feel a bit lost. So I think the first thing is like, well, what country are we going to hire in and why, right? It could be because of you're looking for a talent pool of sorts, right? So there's deeper talent in certain types of organizations or types of roles depending on the country you're in. There's also different cultures in Latin America. A lot of US companies don't understand that, Argentina is as different to Mexico as Italy is to Germany, right? They're completely different cultures. So I think that's another thing that's important. And then you get into the logistical part of it, right? So you guys know very well the payment side of it can be a little bit intimidating, how to handle the contracts, how to handle the legal part of it, compliance, all that sort of thing. So I think that's one that people sometimes feel a little bit cautious about. But as long as you have someone that understands what is the proper strategy depending on the situation that you're in or the goal that you have, that can be easily taken care of. And I think like there's also like common mistakes. Like I think a lot of times companies from the US, when they come to Latin America, they make one of two big mistakes that are in a different category, which is they go for the cheapest person, right? I think that is like the worst strategy that you can have, because when you come to Latin America, you can get a great person, pay slightly above the market rate in their local. And if you do that, you can get great people and retain them. And I think the second challenge or mistake that I see is that they see them as the LatAm team rather than being part of their team, right? So I think it's
Of the
very
whole team or
important,
the global
you
team.
know, a person in LatAm what makes them different, what makes them great, what makes them like very good assets to your company is that they're going to be very passionate about the work that they do. And if they don't feel like they're part of the company, part of the mission, part of the strategy, I think you can lose a little bit of that advantage. So I think a lot of US companies see them as the offshore team or the nearshore team rather than the team, right? So I think it's important to involve them. So lots of challenges. And part of what we do is try and go through all of those common mistakes that we've seen and help people to do it well, right? It being hiring in Latin America and building a successful team that's going to help drive your business.
That's great, Joseph. Talking about this whole new remote ecosystem, especially Latin America, that is becoming like a new hub for remote job opportunities. How do you think access to global opportunities is going to change the life for a TAM professional and who doesn't need to leave the country to get this type of job opportunities or high investment in payments?
Yeah. So I think that, of course, there's an opportunity to make a bit more money, right? But I think that in your career, you shouldn't be optimizing on how much money you make, especially early on. You should be optimizing on how much you learn. And I think for me,
Hmm.
I've lived in 7 different countries. I speak 3 different languages. And I think the number one thing that that's given me is the ability to adapt in different environments. It's given me the opportunity to learn from lots of different people. So I think like first of all for Latin America and for Latin American professionals, the ability to work in an international company, to see how business is done on the other side, to have their hands in different markets is going to be huge. And I think ultimately what that's going to create is the opportunity for them to get higher paying jobs or jobs that have more impact, right? And what that's going to lead to is an ecosystem that builds up in terms of the skill of the talent in the country and then
Yeah.
also the money coming into their country. One thing that Simon Borrero always talked about with Rappi and his mission is that how can we make countries in Latin America net exporters rather than net importers? A rich country is a country that produces more than it spends. Depending on how you see
Yeah.
things, the US, we're not really like that anymore. But if you look at Germany or Switzerland or Sweden or Norway or Denmark, which are kind of the countries that people look to in terms of quality of life and the happiness of their people and the success of their people, what do they have in common? They're net exporters. So I think if you can find a way to create a business that helps LATAM create more, ultimately that's going to contribute to a better society overall. And it was something that Simone talked about that really impacted me greatly, and something that I'm always thinking about in terms of why do I do this? Why do I put my heart and soul into this? And I think ultimately it's how do I create a situation where an economy can grow and a global workforce can grow and emerge, right? So for me, I think that's the main motivator.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. How do you see the LatAm remote talent ecosystem evolving in the next maybe 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think that what you're going to see first is, and you're already seeing is that there's going to be more of an emphasis on learning English, right? I think that, people like you work for an international company, even though you're located in Latin America, and you learned English. And if you didn't have that, you probably wouldn't have that opportunity open to you, right?
Oh, yeah,
So I think like
absolutely.
there's a lot of emphasis on learning English that's going to start to take place because people are seeing that, hey, it is an achievable thing to live the American dream, but do it from home, right? So I think like that's one thing that you're going to be seeing is that, the English level is going to evolve, and all the studies show that the English level is improving in Latin America and growing. I think the second change that you're going to see is before it was just seen as a place that you could outsource your lowest level task or your most menial tasks. But I think the big shift that's coming and has already started to come is more high level roles being hired in Latin America, right? We live in a remote society, with COVID coming on, most companies are working remote. So there's really no difference between having a team that's scattered across the US and a team that's scattered across all of the Americas, right? And I think that, the really, really smart companies, they're seeing that the arbitrage opportunity for lower level roles is there, but it's even bigger for super high level roles. A VP of a tech company in the States, they have $1 million packages. Even if you're giving those packages, you're still competing with the likes of, OpenAI, Facebook, Amazon, Google, whatever it might be, right? Now, when you go to Latin America and look for really, really top talent, you can be the belle of the ball in terms of like attractiveness to candidates in the US. And there are developers in Brazil or Colombia or Mexico or Argentina that are just as good as Silicon Valley developers, but you don't have to pay them that huge salary. Why? Not because they're worse, but because the cost of living is lower, right? So I think in these really, really
Mhm.
high level important roles, you're going to see more people in LatAm getting involved. And a lot of that has to do with the startup ecosystem and the business ecosystem and the tech ecosystem evolving. And the whole level of talent is rising. And you're starting to see proven leaders that have actually delivered very high level business results at scale in Latin America. And you're going to see those people starting to get more international opportunities. And it's something that I encourage with all of my clients.
Which industries or skill sets do you think are going to be most in demand for U.S. companies, especially for Latin America remote talent?
Yeah, so I think there's certain ones I would start like deductively, right? So there's certain ones that I think don't translate very well, and I think those ones are going to kind of stay stateside. So when you look at roles that are, sales oriented, I think that like if you're building a sales team, you should build a local sales team that connects with local people. I just think that that works a lot better. But as far as Latin America, I think what makes sense, right, is, anything that's technical, anything that's, like developers or product people or designers. And then, of course, this is not just a LatAm trend, this is a global trend, but people that are very good at using AI, right? Whether it be in operations or marketing or product development, you name it. I think like that's one that everybody is looking for, one that we always are encouraging our clients to evaluate is how does this person use AI in their workflows? And I think that's a huge trend. And, you notice that there's a lot of really good schools out there, online schools for LatAm talent to learn skills in AI. Truora has a really great initiative right now that they've kind of started as a side project. Platzi, of course, has been a big player for a long time in terms of educating Latinos, and they've gotten into the AI space. So I think that's like a really big trend. And there are really great AI professionals in LatAm. And, people have been using it not just in the States or in Europe or in Asia, but in LatAm as well. And I think you can find really, really great people that understand how to use these tools that are going to be part of the modern workforce and the modern strategy of businesses.
Absolutely. I think AI is going to be part of the future. What do you think is the biggest challenge for LATAM to establish itself as a global talent hub? In the past, India or Asia was taking part of the market or the remote job opportunities. Now LATAM, it's becoming bigger. But what do you think is going to establish itself as a global talent hub?
So I think that, it starts with education at a very young age, right? So I think that, ensuring that the education system is involving basic skills that you need around English, but also starting to incorporate, more technology into their educational system, right? I think that's a huge one. And I think it's, kind of what I talked about, normalizing success or normalizing an opportunity that I experienced when I saw other founders building their company that made me want to do it. I think it's a sort of a snowball effect. When you see your friend or your cousin or your neighbor has a job in an international company working from abroad, you realize that that is doable. And I think it's kind of a natural process that's going to snowball. And I think it's more about building awareness that these opportunities are out there. And then also I think that, there is concern around government restrictions and things like that. And I think that the economies that are more open to that are going to see that their workforce is going to develop a little bit better by having these international opportunities. And I think the ones that try to squash it are going to see that they're going to hurt themselves in the long run.
Or from your perspective, how critical it's to solve international payroll and payments for this new remote ecosystem?
Well, the number one thing that you never want to mess up as a business owner. You can mess up a lot of stuff, but don't mess up
Yeah.
payroll, right?
Payments.
Don't
Yeah.
mess up paying somebody. People work for money at the end of the day. Yes, there's lots of other intrinsic motivators, lots of other mission oriented motivators, but I think it's the number one thing that you need to get right. Um, and I think that there's lots of different problems that come out of contractor payments, right? So I think one thing that you guys are doing that's really great is providing these banking services to contractors or to people that work for companies that are abroad, because sometimes that isn't exactly accessible. A lot of, countries in LatAm don't really give as much access to the financial system to people that are having high paid jobs outside of the normal employment scheme.
Or outside the country.
Yeah. So I think that's another one there. But I think as far as like the payments go, like doing it on your own is a pain, right? And I think that there's really great platforms that are going to be, not only beneficial for the company, but beneficial for the candidates and the employees. And I think, you know, part of a way that you can retain your employees is that you offer them something in terms of their payroll and the payments they can receive, whether it's receiving in US dollars or having access to other financial instruments that I think can be a key retention mechanism. It's not something to be overlooked.
What impact do you think it will have to if contractors had have access to U.S. accounts and Visa cards to improve their overall paid experience, especially from a remote talent perspective?
Yeah, I think it's going to, make those opportunities a little bit more attractive. Lots of times people don't really understand what it means to be a contractor, and what that means for their tax obligations, what that means for other parts. And there's a fear around it. And I think, as long as we can like look at like what are the most important obstacles that contractors are facing when they're receiving payments from abroad and sort of knock those out one by one, I think that it can turn into an advantage to be hired under this modality rather than something that people are scared of, right? I think generally people are afraid of something that isn't traditional or is unknown. And I think the more normalized it becomes and the more those, barriers that have been put up are torn down, the more you're going to see this type of engagement more attractive. Because at the end of the day, under a contractor modality, the company pays less and the candidate receives more. Why? Because of the way the tax system is set up, right? But it's just a matter of having a good accounting strategy and having a good payroll strategy from the company to be able to
Yeah,
enable that.
beautiful. We have talked a lot about the new remote ecosystem, right? But what does building an ecosystem means to you? Beyond staffing and beyond payments and improvement in paid methods, what do you think is building an ecosystem is all about?
So, what I try to think about is my personal ecosystem, right? I'm from a small village of 3,000 people, and I tend to think a little bit smaller in terms of my ecosystem. So for me, what does an ecosystem mean? My personal ecosystem means trying to help as many people as I can, trying to
Hmm.
give my knowledge or give my skills or give whatever I can to people freely. And I think as long as I have that mentality, it comes and it gets paid back to me, right? So I think like an ecosystem, it's important to be a good part of that ecosystem and support that ecosystem. And as long as us as individuals, we look at the people that are close to us, look to the people that are presented to us, look to the people that are in the same industry as we are, and try to support them as much as we can. I think that's how an ecosystem gets built. It gets built brick by brick with individual relationships. And then from there, those individual relationships turn into company relationships or turn into investment relationships, whatever those might be. But I think at the end of the day, it starts with the individual and, looking at the human being on the other side and thinking about, well, how do I help them as much as I can? And, it's not always about expecting something in return. It's more about just giving, giving, giving. And I think, karma and the universe or God, whatever sort of thing you believe in, has a way of giving that back to you.
Receiving back to you. Yeah, that's beautiful. How can companies like Lupa and MIDI collaborate to create a better opportunities in this beautiful ecosystem you're talking about?
Yeah. So, some of my biggest partners that have supported me the most are payroll platforms, right? So, I work with lots of other payroll platforms and, what they see is that there are lots of companies that would like to use their international payroll platform or use it more frequently, right? But they don't understand how to go and find that talent. So I think like there's a two-way street here in terms of supporting each other. For me, I have lots of clients that are hiring for the first time and I send them to payroll platforms that I think fit their problem, right? So I have a relationship with lots of payroll platforms. I understand the benefits and the, maybe the minuses of each of them. So what I try and do is connect, my clients to the payroll platform that suits their need. And then on the other side, what they tend to do is they, use me and the consultative nature of our business at Lupa to be able to expand their workforce. And, if they have, 10 people abroad instead of one person abroad, or 100 people abroad instead of 10 people abroad, obviously it's going to be good for the payroll company because they're going to have more cash flowing through their business.
That makes sense. What social and economic impact do you see for LatAm if we manage to consider this ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think like the social impact is going to be that, there's better companies, better jobs, better education, all those sort of classical things that contribute to an economy, right? And then I think like as far as like globally, I think that, LATAM has a unique advantage in terms of their mentality, right? One thing that people in LATAM are able to deal with really well is chaos. They've been through regime change. They've been through
Oh, yeah.
hyperinflation. They've been through situations of unrest or lack of food and lack of water, electricity. Like they've passed through those sort of things. And that's part of their culture of figuring things out and making the most out of a difficult situation. And I think a lot of, people that grow up in societies like mine that have never really had true hardships maybe can struggle when things get tough. So I think if you want someone that's like very gritty and can problem solve and can make the most out of having very little, I think that's something that LATAM has because it's ingrained in society and they've been through a lot. Now, are they in a much more stable
Absolutely.
position? Yes, but they're still part of that cultural aspect of making the most out of a bad situation that I think people are going to find that, their Latino team members deal with that a lot better than maybe their Canadian or US team members.
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of our evolving process as Latinos, I
Part of their
think.
DNA, right? There's like, a
Yeah.
lot of people always talk about like the Paisa mentality. Paisas are people from Medellin. And I think that's one that really stuck with me. I spent 6 months in Medellin living there and, it's a very innovative and inventive entrepreneurial culture. And I think that entrepreneurial mindset is what everyone's looking for whenever they're hiring people for their company, especially me in a small business, right?
Yeah. What's your dream for Lupa for the upcoming years?
So I think my dream for Lupa, I think first and foremost, I want to have a work environment that I'm proud of, right? I want people to enjoy their job. I want people to feel like they're growing. I want people to feel like they're learning. I want them to earn well. I think that my very, very first responsibility is to the people that work alongside me and work with me at Lupa, right? So more than anything, I think that's something that's super important. How do we get that? Right? I think it comes from delivering great service and having a great product, right? And for me, I think like, the ultimate goal and the ultimate dream is that whenever someone is looking to hire abroad, whether it be in Latin America now or across the world in the future, they see Lupa as a place that can help them to make sure that they're successful in not only finding the candidates, but evaluating them and making sure that they're picking the right people. So for me, it's about continuing to do good work and continuing to build awareness around the type of work that we do and hopefully turn into, a household name and a reference that everyone thinks about and looks at when they think about hiring and trying to build a great team.
That's beautiful. What message would you give a young LATAM talent that is considering remote work for U.S. companies?
So I think the first message I would give them, I'm being repetitive here, is practice your English, get really good, work on your accent, get a coach, record yourself, listen to yourself speak, find friends that maybe don't speak Spanish or find situations where you have to speak English, right? I think that's probably the first one. I think the second one is don't think that just because you're LATAM, you can't get a great opportunity and can't make a huge impact in international business. I think like that is a myth, right? That you shouldn't believe, and anyone that tells you that is lying to you, right? So I think like that's the main thing is like make sure you're arming yourself with the skills, whether it be English or technology or operations or marketing or AI, whatever it is. And then from there, it comes from the belief. And I think when you have those two things, you can translate that into effort to going after what you actually want, right? And I think don't be shy. Don't be afraid to reach out to a US company or a Canadian company or a European company about a job opportunity. And I think the main thing to remember when you're looking for a job is you only need one yes. 100 no's don't matter. One yes does, right? So don't be afraid to put yourself out there. It's the same thing when I was fundraising. Lots of funds told me no, but I only needed a couple to say yes, right? So at the end of the day, you really only need one yes, and don't let any no's or any lacks of response deter you. I think, good things come to people who try, and the lucky people aren't really lucky. They're just someone that keeps trying, and puts themselves in
Mm.
in the position to be successful.
And they'll give up. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what would you say to a U.S. company that is still kind of hesitant to hire from the region?
Yeah, I think that what I would tell them is to run an experiment, right? Use the scientific method. Think about a certain role that you have that's a need for you, whether it be, looking towards cost savings or looking towards the ability to get access to someone that's maybe a bit senior that otherwise might not be as interested in your business because, the hiring market is very competitive. And try it out with one person, right? And I think like that's all you can really do is give it a try. And if it works, keep going, keep going, keep going. And if you're doing it yourself, know that there are factors that maybe you don't understand. So I think, work with an expert, whether it be a headhunter or someone who's already done it before. Make sure you lean on people. I think one thing that I'm most surprised about as an entrepreneur that I didn't expect is that entrepreneurship is a team sport. Even my competitors, direct competitors, are willing to jump on a call and help me with things, right? So
Wow.
people are always willing to help. And I think, part of what makes us human and not animals is that sense of community and that sense of wanting to help, other people. Don't be shy to ask for help if you're going to do it. Just like if you were going to build a marketing function for the first time, or if you were going to build a product for the first time, you would look for experts. Do the same thing whenever you're hiring in a location that you've never hired from before. And I think that you don't have to make the same mistakes other people made. You can learn from their mistakes and try and, lower your risk in that manner, right? So I think it's definitely worth trying and seeing if it's a fit for you. And, what I see is more often than not, once people start to hire internationally, they keep going because they see that the quality that they're able to get is much better. And obviously they're safe
The
in terms
benefits.
of cost.
Yeah. Okay, Joseph. Thank you so much for your time. It was an amazing experience talking to you, for sharing your history, your knowledge bases, and your point of view of this new beautiful ecosystem that is becoming a reality in Latin America. So thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, and also Roberto, I wanted to acknowledge that, you were part of our process, right? So you were a
Oh
Lupa
yeah,
candidate. We interviewed you. I can remember whenever we were talking about, your process and you came up as a candidate and my recruiter was so excited to meet you. So I wanted to thank you for trusting us. And I think, it's a testament to the impact of our business and the impact of
absolutely.
people who are
Yeah, a
willing to,
success case.
yeah, people who
Yeah.
are willing to take a risk like you in going outside of the box and working somewhere new that's international. So I just wanted to, congratulate you. And it really warms my heart to see you here. It feels super full circle to be on this call with you. So, you made my day, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph, for the opportunity. I mean, being here in meeting and receiving all this new experience and culture assets and coming by part of this new business model, it's also thanks to Lupa and the beautiful experience that you bring me as a contractor. So thank you.
Yeah. And talking to Isa, your boss, she seems like she's really happy with everything that you've done. Wishing the best to you guys, and I'm rooting for you.
Beautiful. Thank you.